Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to virtually be here again. I want to welcome you to the 2023-2024 school year. We are going to be talking about suicide prevention today and strategies for making sure that our students are connected and when they become disconnected, noticing that, and how to reconnect them with members of the school community and beyond. So I'm Leigh Reposa. I'm the program manager for the Rhode Island Youth Suicide Prevention Program. So as of today, I've trained about 30,000 of your colleagues since 2009 in suicide prevention in Rhode Island. And that also includes, at one point, we were delivering suicide prevention curriculum for our students, which now we have a mandate through the Rhode Island General Assembly to not only make sure that all of you and your colleagues are trained in prevention, but also that our students are, because what we know is that oftentimes our students are aware of a young person in their lives or in school that might be experiencing an emotional challenge, sometimes before the adults do. So 2 years ago, the Rhode Island General Assembly passed the Nathan Bruno Jason Flatt Act, which says that all teachers, educators, anyone in the school community is going to have this type of training annually. It might be in person or virtually at some point, or online and self-paced. And then also that our students receive curriculum and that every school district has suicide prevention policy and procedures on how to make sure that a young person is supported and connected with services. So having said that, we're going to launch into our agenda today. We're going to talk about we did some introductions. I'm going to talk about briefly some social media campaigns as we launch into September, which is National Suicide Prevention Month. We're going to talk about self-care. We're going to name it, talk about strategies for self-care. I'm going to rely on folks if you have questions or comments, to put them in the chat, and Tabitha is going to be the moderator for the chat. In the event that you need to sort of just take a step away, feel free to do that. We want you to make sure that you feel supported. And then we're going to give you some resources for the employee assistance program as well. Also in the chat, if there's anyone that feels as though they would benefit from talking to a counselor, either after the training or just in general, that option is available for you. We'll talk about the scope of the problem very briefly. Supports for survivors, myths and facts about suicide. We're going to talk about situational and behavioral cues, warning signs. I find that most of the time faculty are asking, what should we look for and what do we do if we see or notice something? We're going to review how to ask the S questions. I'm going to be very transparent about what those questions are that your support team members are asking, and then members of the community, as well as providers like pediatricians, folks in hospital settings, counselors, therapists, and then the referral process. So that's going to be, who in your building where you go to if you're wondering that if a student is struggling or if you're concerned about a student, and then what happens from there. So I'm going to talk about what the Suicide Prevention Initiative looks like, again, in the interest of transparency. And then as you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and Tabitha will go ahead and just pause for a moment so that we can make sure we get to your questions. So social media campaigns. We have Suicide Prevention Month coming up in September. This might be where you start to see things that you might already see on bus stops, on sides of buses, and billboards, and then also through social media. So we have 988, which was started a year ago this past July. That's in place of the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. So now there's just a 3-digit number that you can call if you're worried about yourself or somebody else. The other thing I wanted to mention about 988, and there's a QR code there, is that there's also an amazing chat function. So if somebody were to chat 988 or text rather, there's a whole sort of menu of questions that are asked, very thorough, to make sure that the person is engaged, that we, what is really, kind of bothering them, and that's answered immediately. We also have hashtag Stop Suicide through the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, with the Trevor Project, the Jason Foundation. There's probably many, many more, but I just wanted to touch on a few. Hashtag Be Here Tomorrow through Kevin Hines, the ripple effect. He went ahead and, after an attempt years ago off the Golden Gate Bridge, is a attempt survivor of suicide. And he made a documentary about the ripple effect of suicide, meaning all the people that can actually be involved and connected with somebody that is struggling. And he went back and interviewed the folks that were in his life in high school, coaches, clergy, teachers, nurses, family members, and talked about the role that all of those people had played to really sort of keep him visible as far as some of his mental health challenges. He talks about recovery, which I think is really powerful. So what's your self-care? This is where I want folks to start thinking about, even already today, what are some strategies that you did for self-care?
Leigh, can I just pause you for a second? Are you moving your slides?
I am.
I'm not seeing that on my end. Is anyone else not seeing that?
Okay, let me just try to relaunch. Let's see.
Yeah, no, yeah, they can't see your slides. All right. I think that might be better. Can you just try to move one and see if that works better? Okay.
Okay.
That's better. Thank you. I wasn't sure if you were talking through
Yeah,
this.
no. Thank you. We would have gone up the whole time. Thank you. So start thinking about strategies for self-care. What are some things that you do for self-care? And we'll sort of move beyond nutrition, hydration. What are some things that folks do for self-care, and specifically things that you feel comfortable modeling for your students? And feel free to pop those in the chat. Anyone have any self-care strategies? So I'm not able to see the chat.
So we have weightlifting, yoga, crocheting, reading a book, baking, Zumba, listening to music,
Awesome.
being part of a community chorus, taking time to do something I love every day, going to the beach, traveling, reading puzzles, asking for help when you're overwhelmed, hiking, being outside, gardening, listening to music.
Excellent.
Singing, taking the dog for a walk, going for a run.
Great. All great self-care strategies and all things that seem appropriate to model for our students, right? So what do people notice when you're not able to get to those self-care strategies? What do you notice? Even if it's a couple days, maybe just the weather prevents you from, gardening or hiking or going for your run. What do you notice about yourself and maybe even your mood?
Stress, I get tired, increased stress, depression, lack of motivation, feeling overwhelmed, feeling down or easily irritated, feeling aggravated. Ooh, watch out.
Yeah.
That answer.
Yeah.
Carrie, lack of patience, easily annoyed, short fuse, feeling down.
Excellent. So we're not as effective, right? If we're not. So, and our students notice that. But what I wanted to say about that is that we're modeling those self-care strategies, but it's okay to say, I didn't get to that this morning, and Miss Reposa is feeling not as energetic today. Just kind of front loading that I don't feel as patient as I normally do. But here are some of the things that I'm going to do to remedy that, maybe after school or the next day. So they know that we're human, we are human, but I just kind of make sure that I am modeling some things because they might not be getting that in other areas of the world. And then for those of you who have pets, how are your pets? And I know I've had this conversation with folks before, but it kind of is an analogy to our students. How do our pets communicate with us? And I think most of you would sort of say that your pets are also a form of self-care, but how do they communicate with you and let you know exactly what they need? What kinds of behaviors do they do?
Non-verbally.
Yeah.
Meow a lot, whine.
Meow, they'll whine.
Bark
Yeah.
a lot.
Bark. Okay.
Jump.
And so what are your pets typically trying to tell you in some of those instances? What are they trying to communicate to you?
Basic needs.
Yeah.
I want attention. They need help.
Mm-hmm.
Need something.
Sometimes the barking is like a security threat, right? There's an animal, a squirrel. Yeah. So our students are doing the same things, is really just kind of why I always give that example, is that they might not have the words, just like our pets don't have, verbal words to necessarily communicate their need, especially if it's an emotional need, but our students are using their behaviors to communicate the types of needs that they have. So we used to say things like they're looking for attention, they're attention seeking, they're being manipulative. But really what our students are doing is they're asking for help, and they might not have the words to do it. So they're using their behaviors. And if we're not able to sort of interpret that behavior, then they're going to increase behaviors and sometimes become more on our radar. So a lot of times, you're probably going to work with your support team and they're going to say things like, what is this student trying to tell us? And as frustrating as it can be sometimes, the student is trying to tell us something. It's just sometimes that patience level. But the reason why I say that is the earlier we intervene, then the behavior won't escalate, and that we can kind of make sure that they're getting their needs met, and then they're present more for learning. So survivor support. So we talk about survivors of suicide are either attempt survivors or folks that are loss survivors, which means that you've had a loss of somebody in your own life, your community, your family, in the school community. And so it's really important to make sure that survivors know that there's support through the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We also have annual walks. There's a couple coming up this fall, one in Newport and one in Providence. And then we also have International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, which is typically the second weekend in November. And that's something where you can go to the website afsp.org and you can look up the Rhode Island chapter and look at where people might be posting an event. But it is a really powerful event. And then we also have resources for survivors where we make sure that folks know their stages of grief. For anyone who's ever experienced grief, you might start at anger, you might start at denial, you might start at bargaining, you might have a few moments of acceptance, and then you might be right back at anger. And that's okay. So what we really try to normalize for people is that there's no playbook for grief, right? And that the stages of grief are very fluid, and that bereavement is very complicated. So when people say, you know, I feel like I should be, you know, past this by now, it's okay if they're not. So I just want to make sure that people know there are resources. So this is a social norm classroom, typically more of a high school classroom. I just wanted to point this out. I know I use this slide a lot, but again, just like our pets, our students are coming to us into our classrooms and they don't necessarily have, you know, a note that says, I just want to let you know that I'm in the throes of addiction, or I'm coming from a family where there's substance use, or, you know, I've been recently diagnosed with depression, or I'm having trouble, you know, navigating an eating disorder, or I'm a, you know, a survivor of abuse or trauma. They're not coming in saying those things necessarily, but I want you to know that statistically they are in our classrooms. And so what we know about the adolescent brain is that it's not fully developed, right? So the adolescent male brain probably fully develops around 24 to 26. Adolescent female brain probably around 22 to 24. So if we have, you know, elementary, middle school, high school students, they're in the throes of that development, meaning their brains are not equipped to cope with these types of stressors. So that's really where we come in, because they might just be surviving, which means they're not thriving. So if they're in that fight, flight, freeze, they're not really present for learning, which is what we can see as far as some academic challenges, right? So I just kind of wanted to put that out there. And then some of our students actually have multiple risk factors or adverse childhood experiences going on that can impact their brain and their development. So it's just important to make sure that we recognize that these students might need help coping.
Leigh, can I pause you for 1 second?
Yes.
We had a request for you to make the slides full screen. We do have some big groups watching in a big room on the screen. So just wondering if we can try to make that happen.
I have to be honest. I am literally, mine is full screen. Let's see.
Slides.
Screen, black screen. Would it be helpful?
That's not it.
Yeah, it's not.
What is the camera? What does that do? There's like a little camera button right where your cursor is. To the right. Nope.
To the right. This?
Keep going. Yes. Nope, that's not it.
I presenter view. Is that better?
Try it. It hasn't changed yet. There you go. That's better. Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. So the scope of the problem, really, this is the youth risk behavior survey that your students take in middle school and high school in Rhode Island every 2 years. This was just some data that came out of one of the last surveys. It's just really telling us what we already know, is that our students have in fact been struggling for 2 or more weeks at some points. And some of our students have said, yes, I've actually seriously thought about suicide 1 or more times in the last 12 months. So that's concerning. but that's also why we're here, is we want to get to our students before that 2-week mark, right? Before that sort of crisis is evolving or emerging. So we are all gatekeepers. Who are some of the other gatekeepers in our students' lives? I'm not going to give you the answers to that next slide. Who are the other gatekeepers in our students' lives? Besides us, besides their parents, besides family? Who are the other gatekeepers? And let's sort of just brainstorm in the school community. Who are their gatekeepers? I met a lot of them yesterday, actually.
So we have their friends, peers, coach, SRO,
Mhm.
lawyers, teachers, coach and mentors, relatives,
Yes.
friends, parents,
Mhm.
bus drivers,
Yes, thank you for saying bus drivers.
work friends.
And even some of our folks in our facilities, so our custodial staff,
Mhm.
we also have our food service staff, the front office staff, our para educators, volunteers that come into the school. So there are a lot of gatekeepers in the school, which just means a consistent adult presence. So what we know is the research tells us that the better the outcome for a student if they have at least one consistent adult throughout the 3 stages of their development. And so oftentimes that's you, right? People in the school. And then what about outside? I know some people talked about outside, but let's talk about like maybe the virtual world. Who could be some of their gatekeepers? Safe gatekeepers.
Gaming friends.
Exactly. Gaming friends for sure. It could even be some influencers, people that they keep in touch with that are in their family and in the virtual world. So it's just really important to know at least 2 gatekeepers for our students who they identify. Who do they feel connected with? Usually I just ask them if I'm doing an exercise, who's one trusted adult that you have in the school community? And they might list, that person. And then who's outside the community? And they might say, a family member, their older sibling, somebody in their after school program, babysitter. And so sometimes when we're concerned about a student, we want to start brainstorming who are they connected with when they're not with us, or who else are they connected with in the school? And then kind of noticing if they're not connected, intentionally reconnecting them. So we're going to talk about how to do that. So myths and facts about suicide. I'm not going to give you the answers. So suicide attempts happen mostly around the holiday season between Thanksgiving and New Year's. Is that a myth or a fact? So again, I'm not giving you the answers. That's why the slide is not up. So suicide attempts happen more often and fatalities happen more often around Thanksgiving or New Year's. Is that a myth or a fact?
So far we have fact. That's the consensus so far.
So it is a huge myth. So we are more connected around the holiday season. There's more people that we're interacting with, family, friends, socially, maybe out shopping. There's more sort of social events like parties, get-togethers. So there's more opportunity to notice if somebody is struggling or has had a change in that sort of 3-month time frame. So having said that, when do you think suicide attempt rates and fatalities go spike in this country? What season? And it's not winter. So what?
May. We have May, spring, summer. Spring, summer,
Yes.
summer.
So it is spring. It is spring. So you're looking at sort of a slide of statistically, our students have more stress in the spring, and arguably adults as well. It's a time of transition. There's also sort of a neurobiology, sort of experience that we have when the sun comes out. We actually have more energy to sort of act on our depressive thoughts that we might have had over here during the holiday season or sort of the winter time when we didn't have as much energy. So what we do know is that they spike in the spring. Our students have a lot of stress in the spring. I know we do as well, but they have academic stress. They're still testing. They might, have some transition for April break, graduation, not graduation. So it's just really important to sort of hit the refresh button in, early March on some of the things that we're talking about today, because they do start to spike in the spring. Students who have made a plan to die by suicide there's nothing we can do to intervene and to stop that and to prevent that. Is that a myth or a fact? Once a student has decided to die by suicide, there's nothing we can do. Myth or a fact?
Myth is the consensus so far.
Okay, yes, it's a huge myth, absolutely. So I just tell students, I can keep you safe today, and that's what I'm here for. I'm invested in your success both in and out of the classroom. And sometimes that means that we're going to have to get somebody else involved in order to keep you safe or to help you. But yes, it's absolutely considered something preventable today. Students who are constantly in crisis, who always threaten suicide, are never going to make an attempt. Is that a myth or a fact?
Myth.
Yes, it is a myth. What we know is that 90% of people that die by suicide had an underlying mental health challenge, whether it was treated or untreated. But what we do know is that there's a higher risk of attempt for people who have an underlying mental health or diagnosed mental health challenge. And the last myth or fact I can say is, let's see, just by asking a student directly if they're thinking about killing themselves, you have increased their threat level. Is that a myth or a fact? So just by asking, now you've planted the seed and now they're going to be thinking about it. Is that a myth or a fact?
Myth is the consensus.
Yeah, just by asking, yourselves, if somebody asks you something and they're starting to tune into some sort of challenge that you have, maybe it's stress or maybe it's, an emotional challenge, you're kind of like are at ease because somebody's noticing that. So you've actually reduced their threat level just by asking. So you're opening up a conversation. Great job. I did want to say that our students who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, or two-spirit are at higher risk of suicide attempts if they are not having a positive coming out or questioning process somewhere in their lives. So this is where we want to make sure that they feel safe both physically and emotionally, hopefully in school for sure, but in other areas of their lives. And it's just really important to make sure that our students are also connected with resources like in Rhode Island, we have Youth Pride, resources within the school, just to make sure that they feel safe emotionally and physically. We look at absentee records and, I think there was a session yesterday on absenteeism. A lot of those students who are not coming to school, there's a whole story that can be told. So I want to make sure that we're always taking absenteeism very seriously. So suicide clues and warning signs. This is where we're going to kind of dive in to what a lot of educators say that they're looking for. Again, at the beginning of the year, you might start, working with your, advisory group or one of your classes and just introduce yourself and say things like, I take everything you say seriously. Yes, I teach calculus, but I still take everything you say seriously. And that might mean that at some point you might say something and I might be concerned about you because I care. And I might start to investigate that and see what's going on and how I can help you. The one thing that students do say is that if it's helpful, if you're going to be rolling out curriculum that might be cathartic or activating. I'm just going to give the example that I always give. When I was in 4th grade, I read Bridge to Terabithia. And I still remember that today, and I'm almost 50. And because it was a sad story, and I'm not sure that, the teachers or kids were really sort of prepared for what the emotional reaction might be. So we want to make sure that we're letting students know that if we're going to read something, we're giving them a heads up, and that there's resources available. So essentially, if they've had their own lived experience with that topic that you're reading about, or that you're going to be, journaling about, or learning about, or writing about, or using art therapy about, that absolutely they might be triggered or activated by something. And make sure that the student support team members even know that you're going to be rolling that out. So some basic warning signs. Student might be threatening to kill themselves or somebody else. This might be verbal or might be online. They start looking for ways. They start going to the library. I always say the librarians, you're like another area of the eyes and ears of the school, because students might be starting to have an interest in a topic that maybe they don't have that interest in the classroom, and they start checking out books or looking up information, looking for ways, writing about death, And again, these are changes in a student. So we're looking for changes. If a student is normally just pretty kind of apathetic and just kind of grumpy, a lot of times that's their baseline. I'm worried when those kids start to be like really happy or positive or, more engaging or more participative. Any kind of substance use or abuse, as we know, that's an immediate referral to the student assistance counselor. Substance use is a huge risk factor for suicide. When we review cases, oftentimes what I see is there's been some engagement in substance use, even addiction in some cases, and that there's been a significant loss. And then in some cases, access to means. So those are three things that we really want to pay attention to. Student might say that they feel helpless, hopeless. They might start to be rageful, have uncontrolled anger. And again, this is a difference for that student. They might start to do things that are extremely reckless or risky. Legal involvement, fights in school, violence, sexual, behaviors that are risky. They might start withdrawing, meaning withdrawing even just physically. They might start having their hoodie up more. They might, sort of have low energy or not participating in class like they normally do, or they're not as friendly in the halls, or they're not really hanging out with their friends. They start to eat alone or isolate within the school. They might have dramatic mood changes. So yes, does every adolescent have mood changes? Absolutely, they do. They're supposed to. But we're looking for things that are dramatic, meaning sort of over the top and a change for that student. Behavioral warning signs. There might be a student that has had a previous attempt, or they have a history of depression and they've shared that with you, or you've had somebody from the team share that with you. Students who are acquiring or have access to firearms or stockpiling medications. So I always give the example of how do we know if a student might have access to lethal amounts of medication? How might we know that? And you can just type that in the chat. These are just common sense strategies. How might we know if they have access to lethal amounts of medication?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, how might we know if a student might have possibly has access to lethal amounts of medication?
They talk about it with their friends, student information system. They might brag about it to others, conversations, they talk about it, if their parent just had surgery, question mark.
Yeah, so if there's a family member who has a chronic health issue, if there's hospice involved in a family, they might have access to, morphine or things.
Someone just said access is pretty easy.
Yeah, and it could be, especially if things aren't monitored. Maybe there's a family member that's a provider. Maybe there's a family member that's a veterinarian or works in the healthcare field. So what we just want is we want to restrict the amount of access to lethal means. So that can be ingestion, poison, which is pills, or it could be lethal means like a firearm. Some students might give away their possessions. So things like they give away their devices or something that's really important to them. A pet, their, Jordans, or something that, somebody gave to them that was really precious to them. They might have sad or consistent postings somewhere in social media. They might, and again, you might not see those things, but somebody might show you those things. They might submit writing assignments or journal entries to you that are dark in theme, that are different than they normally are. Maybe they're, just starting to draw things that are a lot more dark than they've ever drawn before and more graphic. Unexplained anger, irritability, and again, we talked about truancy. Public embarrassment or humiliation. I think sadly, most of us can probably recall an instance where we had an example of this in our own childhood, but it's really important to support that student if they've had something, maybe it went on in their family or personally or physically they had something happen, and just kind of ask them, how are they doing? And I know that can really be hard. You feel like you can't really escape and that everyone's thinking about that and talking about you. I just want to know how you're doing, and that I'm here for you. Family history of incarceration or any kind of public legal history in a family, any kind of change in school performance. So this is where I kind of give the example of an A to an A minus could absolutely be, or the change in the quality of work that a student is submitting to you. Maybe they're normally on time with everything and now things are kind of delayed. So there might be a story of why that interest is either waning, or maybe they're just not able to actually have the energy to do the same kind of work, or there might be something going on at home that's preventing them from being able to do their work. Any kind of disciplinary action, we always want to make sure that if a student is eligible for in-school suspension, that's a safer place. But if they are going to have to be out of school suspension, that there's a plan in place for either supervision or structure, or a call home a couple times a day just to see how the student is doing. But because we do know that sometimes there are attempts that are made when there is a disciplinary event. Recent disappointment, family problems, any kind of family challenge going on, that could be, disruption in adoption, that could be divorce. It can just be something to have on your radar. Any kind of challenge with basic needs. So that includes housing insecurity, right? Homelessness, food insecurity. And then we're going to jump down to loss. So if you could type in the chat some examples of loss of any major relationship or loss in general for a student, any age, lifespan.
Pet death,
Yes, pet death. That's hundreds of examples. Pet death.
a
Yes.
breakup, death of a
Breakup.
parent,
Yes.
sibling,
Mhm.
grandparent,
Yeah.
and
This time of year is also tough for some of our students who might have siblings who are older, who are either gone off to school or the military, or they've moved and they're doing something else and they're not in the home, because they might have had a bond. It could have been a trauma bond. It could have been just, they were, together all the time and they were connected, especially if they're not having a sort of a safe family experience. So it's important sometimes to make sure that there's still that connection with that sibling. What other examples, Tabitha?
we had loss of a close friend's relationship, mentors, boyfriend, aunt, uncle, cousin.
Yeah, and some of these things happened over the summer, right?
Yeah.
Might not even know about them.
Moving.
Moving is huge. And this is the beginning of the month, so we might even have some students who right now are moving.
Loss of a job.
Loss of a job, yes. I always give the example about, I grew up in East Providence, I worked at Burlington Coat Factory, and I went to school in Massachusetts. So I really didn't have, my after school life was at my job. And if I was ever, laid off, or I would have lost like a whole group of friends. So the other thing about returning to school, we used to say things like, how was your summer? I don't say that anymore. I say, it's nice to see you. Welcome back. Why don't I say, how was your summer? What could have been some of our kids' experiences over the summer?
Summer can suck.
Yes. So I'm gonna put that in quotes, because summer can suck. Doesn't mean it does for everyone, but it definitely does for a lot of people.
Maybe traumatic, home alone the whole time, no food. It could be a
Yes.
trigger, spent time in a psych ward.
Yes.
They were bored or didn't do too much, lack of food or meals.
Yes. So it's important just to kind of embrace that they're back, and like now they're actually safer in school because they have you. They have a consistent adult presence. They have safety. They have people observing them. They have structure. They have their basic needs met, and they have connections. Go ahead.
This is another one. Forced to visit the other parent for months, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Contributing to the family income with constant work.
Yes.
We also had someone say, I think this trigger can be positive though.
Yeah, say more about that.
Cootie, do you want to say more about that?
So this trigger could be positive. What do you mean by that?
You can, Cootie, I'm not sure you can find out more about what happened. Maybe positive for the teacher, I'm thinking, or the,
yeah,
right? Because they can learn more.
Yeah. Sort of information gathering. Yeah, definitely. If the student feels comfortable sharing, absolutely. And that's a testament to your relationship if you already know that student. We're really very concerned about interpersonal violence, bullying, right? So that's, again, fight, flight, freeze. You're trying to survive. You're not thriving. you don't feel emotionally or physically safe. So that's why it's really important to make sure that we're maintaining a safe environment for our students. So these are the physical warning signs. A lot of times this is where I kind of empower the nurses. Sometimes there are things going on with our students that might not necessarily be a sign that they don't want to learn. It might be something that's going on physically. So if they have their head on their desk, lower energy, they're tired all the time and they've never really been tired. That could be things like medication changes. That could be symptoms of medication. That could be things that, why are they not sleeping? Is it an opportunity to look at, do they have a lot of anxiety and they would benefit from going to their pediatrician? Do they have changes in their sleep patterns, their sleep hygiene? Maybe they have chronic headaches or tummy issues, or maybe that you've actually seen some sort of visible scarring or self-harm. So again, this is just an opportunity to make sure that they are checked out because there might be other things going on. So if a student is going to say something directly, they're going to use very direct language, either verbally or written. So they might say something like, I wish I was dead. I'm going to kill myself. This is very direct, right? There's not much room for interpretation. They might also just say some indirect statements that don't necessarily mean they're suicidal, but I think we would all agree we would investigate in some way. So they might say something like, Miss, you're not going to have to deal with me any longer. I'm really not going to be here that much longer. You're not going to have to deal with me. I just want out. I just can't do this anymore. And so does everyone agree you would in some way explore this? Most people say, I would definitely explore it. And this is where we use open-ended questions. What do you mean by that? What do you mean you're not going to be here anymore? What's changed for you? I saw you Friday and now today is Tuesday and you're a mess. What changed between Friday and today? So we're not, at the indirect questions, we're not necessarily at crisis. The direct questions, we might absolutely be at crisis. And I'm going to show you some of the questions that we can ask, or that the questions that your student support team members are asking. The reason why I talk about the second one, what has changed for you lately to make you say that, is that now they're seen, meaning that you've noticed them, they're not invisible, you've paid attention, you've observed them, and you can give examples. And so there's supposed to be a level of narcissism with adolescents, because it is supposed to be about them. Everything is supposed to be about them in their head, because that's part of identity formation, right? So it's just kind of important that maybe you have a strategy of what you might say if somebody says that. What we don't want to say is, are you joking? I don't think you're being serious right now. We don't want to shut it down, because there's typically something going on for a student to say something like that. Tips for asking the question: get the student to somebody who can really ask these questions and has time. Maybe it's not you, maybe it's somebody on the support team, or maybe you're doing it with another team member. Just try to find like sort of a private setting. You're not sort of calling them out in the classroom and sort of asking these questions. Have your resources handy. So the people in the school building that you're going to go to, make sure that maybe at the beginning of the year, you review what that protocol is for referring a student who might be at risk. We never want to leave the student alone, and we definitely don't want to put the student on the bus home without some sort of intervention. So these are some of the questions that we ask as school personnel, team members, that you might be empowered to ask as well. I just want to make sure that they're transparent. You yourself might be a parent, and you might have gone through this yourself with your own child. If you've ever, had an evaluation or assessment with a family member at Bradley Hospital or any other hospital, these are the questions that they ask. So we ask the first two questions no matter what, and the last one. Have you wished you were dead or could go to sleep and not wake up? And the student might say yes. Have you actually had any thoughts of killing yourself? Yes. Have you been thinking about how? And they might give an example. They live near the train tracks. They have a fort out in their backyard. Have you had these thoughts and intention on acting on them? So some students might say, Miss, I've had these thoughts since kindergarten. I have no intention on acting on them, but it makes me feel more comfortable to know I have the option. And as scary as that might sound, that might not be a student that we hospitalize. Again, I just want you to see the questions just so that you're sort of aware of what happens when you refer a student for help, that there's all these different stages that we have to get the student help. So the screener is really important. Have you started to work out the details? The student might say, yeah, I've already done all my homework. I submitted everything early. I did all my chores. I know that my parents aren't going to come home until 5:30 tonight. Do you intend to carry out the plan? And so some students say, yeah, if my boyfriend breaks up with me again, or if my grandmother dies and she's been terminally ill for many years. So some of these questions we kind of interpret as a yes. Again, when we're trying to connect a family with help, we look at the screener, but we're also looking at the information that we know about the student, their history, with us on the team, anything we might know about their past. So we're not making sort of a decision in a vacuum. We're looking at a lot of different aspects of the child. Have you ever done, the last question we always ask, have you ever done anything or started to do anything or prepared to do anything to end your life? And this is where some students might say, yes, at the beginning of the summer when, I went to camp and I had a horrible experience and I felt alone and give an example. And some students might say, yeah, I've started it, but then my dog started working, or the FedEx delivery person came, or my favorite song came on the radio and it kind of like snaps them out of it. So we want to know about those things and what was going on during that time. So these are some strategies that we try not to use. It just doesn't really open up conversation for the student. It kind of dismisses them. They already feel pretty awful to begin with. This isn't really helping. And the protective factors. So this is just a small list. I mean, you specifically are definitely a protective factor. Resiliency, attachment to a pet or family members, a best friend, access to healthcare is actually a protective factor. Supports, mentors, positive adults, things that they do after school that they're involved in, connections. This is what students said to us when we said we were going to be going out into the world and training their teachers and the people in the schools. They said, just know something about us, even if it's our name, maybe something quirky that we have in common. Just be there. They kind of said that they're interviewing the adults for when they are ready to talk, like who they know that they can go to that is going to be a safe person. They might not talk about it because they're looking for someone who understands, and they might not feel like we understand. Personalize a story. They really like it when we give up a hopeful story, not necessarily that a student struggled and they're doing great now and they're fine and everything's perfect, but more of the reality of they struggled, they got some help, and here are some things they're doing now. So stories of hope, essentially. We're trying to listen to our students, not rush to judgment, because their lived experience of adolescence probably looks a lot different than ours. But I never say things like, oh yeah, I went through that too, it was awful, because I didn't go through that too, and I didn't go through it just like they did, right? We try to avoid things like bumper sticker advice, like tomorrow's another day, this is gonna pass, you're gonna be fine. It's just not really, it's kind of empty, and it really doesn't acknowledge what they're going through. I use a lot of we language, like we're going to get you help. We're in this together, right? Because when you are isolated and you feel alone, it's all about I, but we want a we, meaning like there's a team around this person. And here are some of the resources. So 911, absolutely. 988, Kids Link. So if you're ever concerned, this is outside of school, if you're ever concerned about a young person in your own life, or and you just want a console or somebody to talk to, if there's a child in emotional crisis, you can call that number. That goes right to Bradley Access Center. Nobody needs insurance in order to call and just ask questions or triage. Your school is actually using the Suicide Prevention Initiative, which is a whole protocol of doing that screener, calling Kids Link, that's my buzzer to say that maybe to wrap up. And there's a referral process to Kids Link, calling the parents, and then getting an appointment, hopefully for the young person to be seen, maybe doing safety planning, things like that. So your school support team has a whole protocol, and there's another 18 school districts in Rhode Island that are following the same protocol. The other piece of that protocol that we want to mention is that there's support for parents. So we want to make sure that parents feel supported. because they are struggling so much too, oftentimes not with just one child that's struggling, but maybe more than one, or even themselves. So we want to do sort of a team approach with the family. And then in the school environment, here are some people you can go to. I know you have your own internal protocol and to refer to the people on the support team. But yesterday, all of your support team members were retrained in how to use that protocol and that screener that I just showed you. This is just a visual that we had for families, just to remember to lock or limit medications in the home, support and have a supportive sort of relationship with their child as much as possible, and remove and reduce the amount of firearms in a home. Again, we want to know where our kids are connected. So maybe it's just, one thing after school, maybe it's a book club, maybe it's a sport, maybe it's theater, maybe it's music. And sometimes when they're struggling, it's helpful to reach out to those people and get them involved too. This is really very important. So if you have a student who leaves school, maybe like somebody said that over the summer they were having counseling or they were in crisis, supporting their reentry and actually having a reentry plan is very important for when a student comes back, especially if they've had a suicide attempt, because the research shows about 0 to 3 weeks after there's been a crisis, the student is at very high risk for an attempt again. The reason for that is that the stressors are still there, right? Maybe they have a few coping skills or more coping skills. Maybe there's a supportive plan, but maybe they're getting treatment and maybe that treatment is starting to work. But it's just important to know that if they get thrown sort of right back into all those stressors, it can be a time when they might reattempt. So maybe having a plan where the reentry for academics is sort of in increments. Sometimes students can't even come to school for the whole 5 days. Maybe they are having an abbreviated school day, things like that. So I have examples of that I'm going to be sharing with the support team members, because we're a lot more thorough about having a reentry plan now. And that usually happens with the provider, so that they're giving recommendations on things that would be helpful for that student. Some people are probably thinking, well, what if the family doesn't want us to know about any of this? We're really trying to have families know that it's important that everybody at the school that works with the student know how to support their student. They don't need to know all the psychiatric medications and treatment and all the things, but they do need to know how to support their child. And so we're trying to reduce the stigma around that, and they're asked to even sign a form that says that they're okay with having certain members of the school team, including the educator, know how to support their child. We're trying to plant the seeds of hope. And my ask is always that if you like the Lifeline Facebook page, or if you just kind of post that you went to this training, a lot of times people might ask questions. It's sort of the bumper sticker and magnets that we had years ago. Now our social media platform is really telling the world what we feel comfortable talking about, and awareness campaigns. So I just ask that people consider liking the Lifeline Facebook page, or tweet or sending out on Instagram a picture from the Lifeline Facebook page. And then this is me. I'm always available for folks for consultation. I also just want to make sure that people know that your employee assistance program is always available. If you're worried about yourself or family member, or you just want to talk to somebody even after your own lived experience of loss or grief, that they're a great resource. Self-care is really important, and I think the more that we're modeling it with our students, in 10 or 20 years, it's probably not even going to be something that people are hesitant about talking about.
I just did put the information for our employee assistance program in the chat. So the website is there, as well as the phone number, and we do encourage you to use it. It's a free resource for all of our employees. And it provides so many more services than just mental health support, but mental health support can also be difficult to access right now in terms of getting into a provider on your own, whereas our employee assistance program can help expedite that for you if you need support. And you do get a few free counseling sessions directly from the employee assistance program immediately. And then they can link you up to a provider. So if you're feeling like you need support for any reason at all, please don't hesitate to access that resource, and we'll make sure to continue sharing that information with you from the district level so that you constantly have access to it if you need it.
Great, thank you. And in closing, I just want to say, as I always say, thank you for all that you do both in and out of the classroom to support the social emotional needs of our students. I'm very grateful for that, and I'm always grateful to come and do these trainings both in person and virtually.
Thank
I'll
you.
open it up. We have 10 minutes. If folks have any questions, you can chat them to Tabitha, who also knows how to reach me directly if you have any questions you want to circle back with, and I'll put my email address as well.
Before anyone logs off, Leigh, you said you're comfortable with us sharing this recording. Can we also share your slides?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So the recording of this session, as well as the slides, you will have access to shortly, and we'll make sure that you are able to access them easily and take a look back if you need to. So thank you, Leigh.
And I'll probably also just share the resource, the Parent Coach Rhode Island, which is a free texting service that any parent can enroll in for strategies about coping with a young person that might be struggling with mental health.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have questions for Leigh before we log off for this session?
You're welcome.
All right.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, Leigh, and thank you to everyone for signing on and taking this session seriously today. Appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Leigh.